everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Jacob. Today is episode, I think, number 33, 34. I lost count at this point. But before we get to our guest this week, I was going to do a few podcast plugs. You can follow us on Facebook. Facebook.com is Conversations with Jacob on YT. Twitter is CWJ Podcast. Our podcasting platforms is iHeartRadio, TuneIn. We're on Spotify. We're on Amazon Music. We're on Audible. We're on about 20 different platforms. It's hard to keep up with that. You can visit our website, conversationswithjacobpodcast.weebly.com. Check out upcoming episodes, past guests, and check out a little section on there called Post from the Host. And that was my idea, by the way. Anyways, joining me today is Hearron. Is that right?
Hearron, yes. Hearron, like Jackie Chan is what I tell you.
Absolutely. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Now, for the people that's listening and watching that don't know who you are, can you give us a little background?
Sure. I am a school teacher at Calvary Baptist Academy in Shreveport, Louisiana. I'm the girls basketball coach there. I teach 11th and 12th grade Bible classes, which we would call apologetics classes, which basically is to teach students how to make a thoughtful defense of Christianity, to know what they believe and why.
All right. Now, did you always want to do it? Did you always want to be like a teacher role, or was it something that came later in life?
No, my parents both were teachers, so I come from an education background. My dad was a varsity basketball coach. Both of them were, my mom and my dad were both teachers, and they discouraged me from getting into teaching, but when it's in your blood, it's in your blood. And so my degree was in mathematics, but when I got off to college, being raised in the church my whole life, I had some questions, and I felt like I just didn't get any good answers. I would try to talk to my youth pastor. I would try to talk to my pastor, and they had answers, but I just wasn't satisfied with some of the answers. And so I set on a spiritual journey to look at the hard questions, like why does God allow evil and suffering in the world? And how do we know God is really there? And how can the Bible be trusted? And so I had been a teacher for a number of years, and I basically taught math, and then I kind of was worked my way over to the religious side of the curriculum, and got my degree in seminary at Fort Worth Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. And so yeah, it's something that I've been doing. This is my 28th year of teaching overall.
Oh, wow.
And I love teenagers.
All right. Now, for people that's watching and listening, I kind of want to talk about religion for the first part, then we can move on down the line of topics here. And how do we know that God exists?
Yeah, that's one of those great questions that I ask myself. A lot of times somebody may ask me, well, Chan, can you prove that God exists? And I ask a follow-up question. I said, well, that depends. What do you mean by prove? If by prove you mean, do I have a picture of me and God together? No, I don't. I don't have that. So if that's what you mean by prove, I can't do it. If you mean by prove, can we look at God's DNA underneath a microscope? No, I can't prove God if that's what you mean. But if by prove, do you mean, can I show you, can I make some arguments using philosophy and reasoning to show that it's more reasonable to believe in God than not? Then that's what I try to do. And so for example, one of the most, and this is not new, one of the most popular arguments for the existence of God is the design that we see in the universe. It's just unreasonable to think that the design that we have in the universe just came into existence uncaused, out of nothing, not only on the astronomical level, but on the biochemical level, the things that are the cell. When you look at the design that we have in the universe, it implies a designer. And now obviously there could be more unpacking done, but that would be one way you could do it. And most people will at least know somewhat about the design argument.
Now the next question is, and how can we trust the Bible?
Wow. Okay. So This is such a good one. And, a lot of times people will make statements about the Bible that are that, not that they've done any research, but that they've heard certain things. So, for example, you hear stuff like, well, the Bible's been handed down by generations, and they use the telephone game as an illustration to show that, we've all played the telephone game with one person whispers something to another person who whispers to another person, and and skeptics will use that as a definitive proof against the reliability of the Bible. The problem with that is that's not the way that the Bible was handed down. The Bible was handed down not linearly like that, but geometrically. And also it was handed down in a way that can be tested because it was written transmission. So one copy of the New Testament letter may have birthed 5 copies, which birthed 25 copies, and it rose exponentially. So let me give you what I call just a short defense of how we know the Bible can be tested. One of this is
Sure.
the Bible is embarrassing. It has some embarrassing details. And what I mean by that is people don't make up stories to make themselves look bad. People make up stories to make themselves look good. And there's a principle of embarrassment that historians use to determine if an event actually happened. And it's based on that principle. So, for example, there are some embarrassing details about Jesus in the New Testament. He's called a madman. He's called demon possessed. His own brothers don't believe in him. Now, if you're making up a religion and you want people to follow this person, Jesus, you don't say negative things like that unless the gospel writers are just trying to faithfully record what happened. Also, there's embarrassing details about the disciples. The disciples, Peter denies Christ 3 times after bragging that he would always follow him at no matter what. And yet we see that recorded in scripture. So why would someone make that up? So there's a lot of other things that point to the historicity of the New Testament just as being a historical document. And so the embarrassing details one is one that a lot of people overlook, but it's something that historians use to determine if an event has historical evidence behind it. So there again, we could talk about others, but those are that's one of my favorites to talk about.
Absolutely. Now, why do you think that there's so many people that kind of questions if there is a God or not? How do you think people questions that?
How do I think people question that?
Or why? Yeah.
Oh, why? Why do
Yeah.
people question that? Well, that's a good question. It would be hard to answer that for some people because I don't know where they are on their spiritual journey.
Right.
There
Yeah.
there have been uh, some people that have had bad experiences in churches. They've been treated poorly. There's hypocrites out there, and they're hypocrites in the churches. And so what they do is because Christians have let people down, then what they do is they'll turn their back on God altogether, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because if the way I like to think about this is if someone plays the piano and let's say they played Beethoven and they played Beethoven really bad, well, you wouldn't get mad at Beethoven. The person just didn't do a good job of playing Beethoven. So I just don't understand when people have a bad experience with other Christians, they get mad at God because it wasn't God's fault there. It was the people that treated them poorly. And unfortunately, that may be one of the reasons why people question God. Another one may be that nobody's really given them any good reasons to think that God exists. They haven't thought about the design that we see in the universe or the grounding of moral arguments, the moral intuitions that we have. And there may be some others, but I would say those are 2.
Why do you think that God allows evil and pain and suffering to people?
Yeah, this is one where I spend almost a whole semester on, and the short answer is that we live in a fallen world. If God does exist, and if it's the God of the Bible, then he created us with free will. For love to actually exist, it has to be free. You can't force someone to freely love you. And so the world is broken. The world is not the way it ought to be. And we as humans are responsible for this. And we have free will. And so God is allowing us to use that free will to kind of see what happens when we misuse it. And so it's unfortunate, but eventually there will be a day of reckoning where those people who have committed, atrocities. I think of the story of the Amber Hagerman, the little girl in Arlington, Texas, where the Amber Alert was named after. This little girl was abducted off of her bicycle in January of 1996, I believe, and was brutally murdered. They found her 4 days later. And as to this day, that's since 1996, her killer is still at large. They do not know what happened. They don't know who their killer is. Now, if there is no ultimate justice, then that family will never get justice. But if there is a God who will judge in the final judgment, then this person will not get away with that. So I like to think there needs to be some ultimate justice. So right now, some of the things that we're going through are by our own making, and the others are because we live in a fallen world and it's just broken. It's not the way it ought to be.
Oh, would you say that Jesus is the most, I guess, interesting person in history?
Absolutely. Jesus, here's what's so interesting about him. And for your listeners who've never really studied the life of Jesus, this man he lived 33 years, and we only have 3 years of his ministry recorded. But more people around the globe know who Jesus is than any other person of all history. There have been more books. I challenge any of your listeners to go Google like books about Jesus or songs that have Jesus in the title or in the somewhere. There are thousands of them. And he inspired paintings. He inspired the scientific revolution. There's just so many things about him, and I think it is because he wasn't just a man. Now, me being a follower of Jesus, my view is that Jesus is not just a man. He is actually God in flesh, and he demonstrated this by his resurrection from the dead. And if God exists and wanted to raise Jesus from the dead, he could. Which what this does is it shows that there is one correct religion. It would be Christianity, because Jesus made a very outlandish claim. He said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And he backed that claim up by the resurrection. So I would say that anybody that disagrees with Jesus would be wrong if he rose from the dead. So that's a big one. And I could go on and on about why Jesus is so important, and he's changed my life.
And you brought up a point about there being one Christianity for churches that says, well, you got to be in this church or in this church to go to heaven. What is your thoughts on that? That you have to belong to one church to go to heaven?
Yeah, there's the church is not necessarily a building, and the different churches of denominations, they agree on the main things. And so that's why when people say, well, are you a Baptist? Are you a Lutheran? I don't like the denominational tags because they have a lot of baggage. So I just tell people, I say, look, even though I go to a Baptist church, I'm a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said that whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So those that call on him, they realize they are, I like to use the term rebels. We are all rebels. We've done things that are bad and we deserve punishment. Well, Jesus took that and he didn't make any mistakes. He didn't sin at all. And so he offers us a trade. If somebody came up to you and said, hey, I'll trade you $100 for a $5 bill. and they're going to give you 100 and you give them 5. That would be a really good trade. You'd think the person was stupid. You're like, okay, I'm taking that. I'm taking advantage of this. Well, in the trade that happens with Jesus, Jesus gets all of my badness and I get his goodness. And that is imparted to me simply by trusting in him like I would trust a parachute to save me. And those people that do that are in the church, the body of Christ, if you will.
All right. And when people think of religion or Jesus, and what's one thing that they get wrong about it?
What is one thing they get wrong about?
Yeah.
Oh,
One thing they get wrong about, the Bible or Jesus or the church in general.
I think one of the main ones is that we can somehow please God with our goodness, that we can somehow do something to earn God's favor. And I would say there's absolutely nothing we can do because God demands 100% holiness. I like to ask people, have they ever told a lie? And most people say, well, yeah, I've told a lie. And I said, what do you call people who tells lies? And they say, a liar. Well, how many lies do you have to tell to where you're a liar? One. And so we've all fallen short of God's standard, which is 100% perfection. And so we cannot do anything good enough to earn God's favor. To try to do that is almost to insult God. It would be like somebody going and trying to buy their friend's new Lamborghini for $5. Say, hey, I'll buy that Lamborghini. Well, the person will be insulted. Well, that's kind of the way it is when we try to offer up goodness for God. And this is where I think some of the other religions are separated from Christianity, because when you look at their religions that are different from Christianity, their main thing is do. Whereas Christianity in Christ says it's done, it's done, it's done. We just have to put our faith and trust in him. And so then we do good works, not because we gain favor, but because we love God and we want to follow him.
All right. And what is your opinion on the preachers on TV like Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, and all of them? What is your thoughts on them?
Yeah. Well, I would classify those guys as health and wealth gospel preachers, which what they teach, I don't think lines up with scripture. Now, again, I can't judge their hearts. I don't know their hearts, but I can test their teachings by scripture. And one of the things I know as being a follower of Christ and a student of the Bible is we are not promised to be disease-free, to be that I'm going to have money in the bank all the time. As a matter of fact, we were promised the opposite, because Jesus told his disciples that he said, in this world, you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I had a friend one time ask me, he said, if I become a follower of Christ, will my life get better? And I said, I can't promise you that. As a matter of fact, your life may get worse. I know that in some countries, like a Muslim country, if they become a follower of Christ, they just sign their own death warrant. And so there is no promise of health and wealth. So I think we need to look at those pastors and test what they say by scripture. And I have done that. And I just think they preach a different gospel than what Christ taught.
Now, do you think abortion is wrong?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Abortion. So let me give you this one.
All right, go ahead.
I'm going to give you the 30-second. I am pro-life because I think that it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. And the science of embryology tells us that at the earliest stages of development, each person was a living, whole, distinct human being. And there are no good reasons to justify killing the unborn baby that they once were and not be able to kill the adult a person is today. So there's only 4 differences between an unborn individual and an adult. And that is The acronym SLED is the way I remember it. SLED. Size. It is true that the child is smaller than a baby that is born. But wait a minute. On average, men are larger than women. Does that mean that Shaquille O'Neal has more value than, say, Simone Biles, who's like 5'1"? Well, we know that's not true. So size is not a good qualification to kill someone, or justification. L is level of development. It is true that the unborn is in a different level of development than an infant, but also a 4-year-old girl is not as developed as a 24-year-old girl, and yet we can't kill the 4-year-old girl because she has a different level of development. E is environment. It is true that the unborn is in a different environment. They're inside the womb. So basically, this one boils down to location. But I like to ask people this: is you probably change locations a multiple times a day. If I cross the street, I've changed locations, but did I stop being me? If I roll over in bed, I change locations. Did I stop being me? Where you are has no bearing on who you are. So environment is not a good justification for killing the unborn. And the last one is degree of dependency. The baby is dependent on their mother at that stage of development, but we all are dependent. We have some level degree of dependency. A person that takes medicine has a degree of dependency. A person who uses eyeglasses depends on them. Someone who has a broke leg and they're using crutches has a degree of dependency. And degree of dependency is not good reasons to justify killing the unborn that a person once was, and not being able to kill that same the adult for those same reasons. So that's the short answer. Now, I want to address one. I'd like to address, Jacob, it's okay. One objection that I get is, what about rape? What about a woman who is raped? And this is a horrible, horrible injustice that's happened on this woman, because she didn't choose the pregnancy. And so doesn't that therefore throw a wrench into your argument about abortion? And I don't think it does, because I think I can be consistent. And let me demonstrate this. Is our value as human beings based on the way that we were conceived? Some people were conceived in love, some people were conceived in lust, and some people were conceived in violence. Well, does that mean that because the child that was conceived in violence therefore deserve a penalty that not even the rapist is going to get? What other crime do we punish the child for that they didn't commit, that the father commits? And so all I think, and even though this is a tough subject, all abortion in the case of rape does is add another victim. The woman has already been victimized, and she is doing to the unborn what the perpetrator did to her. I think there's other options, and I could understand the pain that might cause. But sometimes, let me say it this way: I don't think it's right to kill someone so someone else can feel better. I just don't think that in a civilized society that's going to help. So I know there'll probably be some people that take issue with me on that, but that's the hard answer to the hard question. And I think it allows me to be consistent in that.
Absolutely. Now, do you think the reason people get abortions because they couldn't, that they can't take care of the kid because they're way too young to take care of it?
Yeah, that might be one. Finances are children are not convenient, whether they're planned or not. And I think there's a lot of different reasons why. Some may be that they didn't want to be a parent, or they just wanted to, have sex and not worry about the result. The problem with that is that's what happens. And so maybe they didn't want to tell their parents, especially, or if they're a young kid and they come from a religious background and that's frowned upon to be pregnant out of wedlock. And it's almost like that's becoming more and more acceptable today. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different reasons. I don't like the reason for health care. It says that abortion is not health care. It's not health care. It is health care is where you help a person thrive, and the child is going in there losing his life. And so it's health care for whom? It's not health care for the unborn.
What is your opinion on the same-sex marriage?
Wow. May offend
Tough
some.
question.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Well,
Uh,
if this goes back to the God question, and I like to ask when it comes to this, I think there's two types of truths in our culture. There's truths that we discover, and there's truths that we decide. So, like a truth that I decide, I might say, chocolate ice cream is delicious. Well, nobody would really take issue with me on that because that's a truth based on my preferences and my taste. Another example would be in 2015, the NFL Rules Committee got together and they decided that the extra point was too easy in football. So they made a rule change and they moved the extra point back. I believe it was 10 yards. So it would be a little bit tougher. Now, the question I like to ask is, can the NFL Rules Committee do that if they want to do that? Well, sure, they can. That's the truth that they decide because they govern the rules of American football. But what if the NFL Rules Committee got together and decided that the speed of light was too fast and they wanted to slow it down? And so they said they were going to change the speed of light. Well, we know they couldn't do that because the speed of light is not something that somebody decided. It was something that they discover. We discovered that the speed of light was, and nobody can change it even if they wanted to. So the question then becomes, is marriage like that? Is marriage a truth that we discover, or is it a truth that we decide? Now, my view is based on the God question. If God exists, and I think he does, he gave us the institute of marriage. And even though different cultures do it in different ways, the question is, who should be involved in marriage? And my view, according to the Creator's design, is one man, one woman for one flesh for one lifetime, and any children that union produces. And an argument for this would be the man woman complementarianism of their sexual organs. Men were made for women and women were made for men. And it's only a man and a woman that can produce offspring. And so can two men commit to each other or two women commit to each other if they want to? Sure. They can already do that in their culture, but it's not marriage. It needs to be something else. Now, if you've got any listeners that would disagree, that what they're going to say is that they want you're being bigoted. No, they can already do that. They can already commit to each other. What we don't need is the government saying you have to recognize that, because there are some relationships that are better than others. And I would say the man-woman relationship gets the MVP because two men can't reproduce, two women can't reproduce, and their men and women are just different. And I think that's part of how God made us. So anyway, that's the short answer. I don't want same-sex people bullied. I don't want them to force to be married to someone else if they don't want to. But I don't think the definition of marriage needs to be changed, nor can it, because it's the truth that we discover, kind of like the speed of light.
So, do you feel the same way that for people that want to go from male to female, the female to male, like transgender, do you kind of feel the same way about those?
Yeah, I don't think a person can actually change from become a man if they were born a woman and vice versa. They can they can put on a costume, basically. They can have surgery, but our maleness and femaleness goes to the very fiber of our down to the molecular level. And
So
this
you're
is
so you're saying if they have a surgery, if a male wants to become a female, after they have the surgery, deep down they'll still remain that one gender.
yeah, absolutely, because all after that they would just be a mutilated. If they were a man and they wanted to become a female and they got the bottom surgery and all that, they would still be male. It would just be that they're a mutilated male now, because maleness and femaleness is not. It goes back to that truth about, is gender something you decide or is it something you discover? And this is why I think our culture uses words like uh, the sex assigned at birth. No, I've never been to a gender decide party, but I've seen many gender reveal parties where they are revealing something that is already there. And so I think my heart really goes out to those people that are confused about their gender. And there's a lot of detransitioners now that are starting to make their voice heard because they regret it. They were told lies, and I think a person cannot actually become a male or female if they were born in the opposite, because it's biology. It's just biology. It's a truth that we discover.
Yeah. And what is your definition of marriage?
Oh,
We
one
talked
man.
we talked about it a few minutes ago, but he got a definition.
Yeah, I would say the definition of marriage is one man and one woman for one flesh for one lifetime, and any children that man and woman produce. Now, that's the ideal. I know that some people, your parents may have been divorced, or you may have been divorced, and that's the ideal. And this is where the brokenness of the world comes in. We live in a fallen world, and that's why that is the ideal. And my grandparents on my dad's side were married 74 years.
Oh wow.
And at one point they were the third longest married couple in the state of Louisiana. They have since passed on, but they were committed to each other. And anything else just doesn't seem right. That's what most of us want. We want that happily ever after, and it doesn't always happen, but that's what the ultimate goal was.
All right. Now, and where do you stand with politics?
Yeah. Man, you want to get, you want, we're talking about all the subjects that you're not supposed to talk about, religion and politics, but I love talking about these. I'm not committed to a party. I'm committed to principles. And I know that I do not put hardly any faith in government, because I know government is not going to solve our problem. Our problem is not less taxes and climate change and all that stuff and race. That's not our problem. Our problem is we are broken, and we need somebody to fix it. And the only person that's going to be able to fix this is Jesus of Nazareth. So yes, I will participate in politics, but I know that whoever's elected president, it doesn't matter, is not going to solve mankind's ultimate problem, which is sin and rebellion. We need someone that's not part of that to come and rescue us. So uh, I don't think anybody should put ultimate faith in government.
All right. Do you think that the government should put praying back in school?
I don't think they should put it as a mandatory thing. I think it should be voluntary. And anyway, kids have their freedom of religion. They have the right to be able to express that. Now, since I'm a teacher at a Christian school, we can pray because we don't have tax funded dollars or government funded tax dollars. But if I was teaching at a public school, I could pray silently, but I don't think I could lead the kids in a prayer, but the kids could still pray. So if you make it open where you must pray, then what do you do with those that want to, you know, pray from a different religion? And I think that's what's so great about America. It's freedom of religion, not freedom from. But I want to keep the church and the government, the church and state separate. I don't want to interfere with the government per se, but I don't want the government interfering in the church either. I don't want the government to stick its nose in the church and say, well, y'all got to close down because of COVID, or, you know, something like that. So yeah, that's the short answer on that one, Jacob.
All right. Do you think it's wrong for a church to involve politics hand with the Bible? Because I've seen a clip, and I don't know if you know this guy or not, but his name is Greg Locke.
Yes, I know who he is.
I'm sure everybody does, but he kind of mixes everything in together. Do you think a preacher should be doing that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Greg is a little bit more boisterous, and to me, in his view, I think he puts too much emphasis on politics. And you know, I mean, that's his right to do that if he wants to. And you can't separate, I don't think you can separate the Christianity from politics, because even Jesus himself discussed with the politicians and religious leaders of his day. But Greg would be one of those that I think it does just too much. So I'm not real. I don't have a position, really firm position one way or another on that. I just try to just talk. Politics is important. I think we should be good citizens, but again, I just not going to put a lot of faith in politics and the government.
So I guess the last topic here will be fishing. I see you like to do some fishing.
I love to fish. I love to fish. I got into kayak fishing a few years ago, and it's been really hot. What state are you in, Jacob?
Oh, I'm in Virginia.
Oh, okay. So you're on the East Coast. So
Yeah.
I'm in the South in Louisiana, and it's really hot right now. What's the temperature up yonder?
Oh God. The last time I seen it was 91.
Okay, so we've had like 36 days straight of no rain,
Oh wow.
and today I think it was 110, count the heat index. Yeah, so the fishing has been really tough the last couple weeks, but during the summer when I'm out of school, I try to do a good bit of fishing. It gets me outside, and I just love being out there, even if I don't catch anything. But I've caught a few good sized bass this year, and I posted them on my Facebook page. So, but that's it. That's my passions right there.
So what's the biggest you ever caught?
This summer I caught there's a trash fish, and it's called a Gasper goo. It's not one that anybody, I'm sure some people eat it, but it was 6.5 pounds, and I thought it was a bass because I was after bass, but that sucker, he turned my boat around. I'm like, what in the world do I have? And then when he broke the surface, I'm like, well, that's a Gasper goo. So that's the first time I ever caught one of them. I've seen a lot of people caught him, but I had never caught him. And he was in about a foot of water. I mean, he was a beast. So the biggest bass I've ever caught has been about 4 pounds. So I still got some ways to go. I'm jealous of some of these guys that post their 10 pounders on Facebook.
And have you ever had any encounters with? Have you ever had any encounters with some alligators?
I've seen them out there. Yeah, there was one that I fished in this little oxbow, and there's a sign out there that says, watch out for gators. And one day I saw this one out here, and he was as big as my kayak. And at first I thought it was a log, and then I saw him moving. And when he got perpendicular to my boat, I was like, holy. And he kept his distance, but he was watching me, and I kept as far away from him. And I've seen him about 3 times. One time I got a little too close, and he went underwater, and not a ripple was on the water. I'm like, I'm getting out of here. But they pretty much don't bother you, but I have seen a few. That was the biggest one I ever seen. Every now and then I just see a little one, but yeah, in Louisiana, we run into gators a good bit.
Oh yeah. Now, at the end of every podcast episode, I would like to ask the guests, have they have any closing thoughts? And do you get any closing thoughts?
Well, no, not really. Except Jacob, I appreciate you having me on your podcast. I appreciate the invite. This is great to meet somebody else who's doing a podcast
Oh yeah.
and meet somebody from another state that's a slap across the United States. So again, thank your listeners. Um, I do have a podcast called Chan's the Man Apologetics, and it can be heard on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and it talks about some of the topics that Jacob and I discussed here, and we go into a little bit more detail. And the next episode I'm gonna give you a shout out on your podcast about your podcast, and I'm gonna tell people to go to listen to Jacob. So
All right.
anyway.
Oh, well, don't thank you for coming on the podcast once again. We're time talking about the religion, politics, and fishing. Not too many people talk about fishing on a podcast.
No, they don't. They absolutely don't.
But anyways, I don't thank you for coming on. And until then, everybody that's watching, tune in next week. Is our Halloween special because we keep everything months in advance. Tune in next week for our Halloween special, October 30th. Supposed to be our guest, the radio medium of her name is Laura Lee. Don't know if she's going to be on or not. We got to reschedule some things. I'm sure about next week. I'm sure you guys will know. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. And until then, God bless, and we'll catch you next week right here on Conversations with Jacob.